What happens when a global celebrity walks onto a live television set thinking the rules don't apply to them? In just 34 seconds of blistering confrontation, one guest's arrogance would lead to the most shocking exit in talk show history. The studio lights were hot that morning. Piers Morgan sat behind his desk, ready for another edition of his show. He'd interviewed presidents, prime ministers, and some of the biggest names in entertainment, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. Meghan swept onto the set with an entourage trailing behind her. She didn't shake hands with the crew. She didn't acknowledge the audience. She simply sat down, crossed her legs, and waited for the cameras to roll. Piers stood to greet her, extending his hand. "Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here." She glanced at his hand, but didn't take it. "Let's just get this started, shall we?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the warm, friendly atmosphere they were used to. Piers, ever the professional, smiled and returned to his seat. "Absolutely. So, you've been making quite a few headlines lately. I thought we could talk about some of the claims you've been making in the press." Meghan's expression hardened. "Claims? You mean my truth?" "Well, some people might call them claims when they can't be verified," Piers said calmly. "For instance, you've spoken about feeling isolated, but records show you had a full staff at your disposal. You've mentioned being unsupported, yet there were numerous people whose job it was to support you. Yeah, can you help us understand the disconnect?" The guest leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "You wouldn't understand, Piers. You've never been in my position. You've never had to deal with what I've dealt with." "Perhaps not," Piers replied, keeping his tone measured. "But I have interviewed thousands of people from all walks of life. I've spoken to refugees who've fled war zones, to people who've survived unimaginable trauma. And I have to say, when you compare experiences, some might wonder about the scale of hardship you're describing." Her face flushed red. "Are you seriously comparing me to refugees right now? Are you actually doing that?" "I'm simply providing context," Piers said. "You're speaking to an audience of people who face real struggles every day. People who work multiple jobs to feed their families. People who can't afford health care. And when they hear someone who lives in a mansion complaining about how difficult their life is, it can be hard to relate." Meghan stood up suddenly, her voice rising. "You have no idea what it's like to be scrutinized every single day. To have everything you say twisted. To have people like you sitting in judgment when you don't know the full story." "Then help me understand the full story," Piers offered, gesturing to the chair. "That's why you're here, isn't it? To tell your side?" She remained standing, pointing at him now. "My side? You've already made up your mind about me. This whole interview is just a setup so you can tear me down in front of your audience. Well, I'm not going to sit here and let you do that." The studio went silent. The cameras kept rolling. Piers stayed calm, his voice steady. "Nobody is tearing you down. I'm asking you questions. That's what journalists do. If you can't handle being asked to explain your public statements, then perhaps you shouldn't make them in the first place." "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you sit there in your privileged position and tell me what I should or shouldn't say? You're nothing but a bully with a microphone." Piers raised his eyebrows. "A bully? I've given you a platform to speak. I've invited you onto my show. And instead of engaging in a conversation, you're hurling insults. Who's the bully here?" Meghan's hands were shaking now. "You know what? I don't need this. I don't need to justify myself to you or anyone else. I came here as a courtesy, and this is how you treat me." "A courtesy?" Piers repeated, genuine surprise in his voice. "You agreed to come on this show. We didn't force you. And treating you means asking you questions? That's not mistreatment. That's called an interview. You're twisting everything I say," she shot back. "Every single word out of your mouth is designed to make me look bad." Piers spread his hands. "I'm literally just repeating your own words back to you and asking you to elaborate. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps the issue isn't with my questions." The audience murmured. Some nodded in agreement. Meghan noticed this, and her expression grew even more hostile. "These people don't know me," she said, gesturing dismissively at the crowd. "They believe whatever garbage the media feeds them. They're sheep." A collective gasp went through the studio. Piers leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. You just called my audience sheep. The very people who watch this show, who support it, who were actually interested in hearing what you had to say, you just insulted them to their faces." Meghan's publicist, standing off camera, made a frantic cutting motion at her throat. But it was too late. The guest had gone too far. "I didn't mean it like that," she backtracked, but her tone was unconvincing. "How did you mean it then?" Piers pressed. "Because it sounded pretty clear to me. You think people who don't automatically believe everything you say are sheep. You think anyone who questions you is attacking you. And you think sitting in a comfortable chair answering softball questions is somehow comparable to real suffering. These aren't softball questions," Meghan protested. "You're being deliberately antagonistic." "I'm being a journalist," Piers countered. "There's a difference. And frankly, if you think these questions are tough, you're more sheltered than I thought." She grabbed her purse from the side of the chair. "I'm not doing this anymore. This interview is over." "We're 15 minutes into a scheduled hour-long conversation," Piers pointed out. "You're just going to walk out?" "Watch me," she snapped. Piers stood up. "Before you go, let me ask you one more thing. Do you think this behavior, this inability to handle basic questions, this lashing out at an audience who came here to listen to you, do you think that helps your cause? Do you think people watching this will see you as a victim? Or will they see exactly what I'm seeing right now?" Meghan turned to face him, her face contorted with rage. "And what exactly are you seeing, Piers? Please, enlighten us all with your infinite wisdom." "I'm seeing someone who wants all the benefits of fame without any of the accountability that comes with it," Piers said quietly. "I'm seeing someone who expects to be praised and believed without question. And I'm seeing someone who, when challenged even slightly, completely falls apart and blames everyone else." "You are a vile, disgusting human being," she spat, "and I hope everyone watching knows what a snake you really are." The audience gasped again. Piers remained composed. "I've been called worse by better people," he said simply. "But the fact that you resort to personal attacks when you can't defend your positions tells everyone everything they need to know." Meghan looked around the studio wildly, as if searching for support. Her publicist rushed onto the set, whispering urgently in her ear, but she shook her head violently. "No, I want everyone to hear this," she announced loudly. "Piers Morgan is a hack. This show is a joke, and anyone who takes him seriously needs to have their head examined." "Are you quite finished?" Piers asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Not even close," she retorted. "You sit here day after day, judging people, acting like you're some moral authority. But you're nothing. You're a failed journalist who couldn't make it in America, so you had to come crawling back here." Piers smiled thinly. "I've worked in both countries successfully, actually. But I appreciate the attempted insult. Is there anything else you'd like to add before you storm off my set?" "Your set?" She laughed bitterly. "This isn't your set. This is a soundstage owned by a network that pays you to sit here and spew garbage. Don't act like you own anything." "I own my integrity," Piers said. "Can you say the same?" Her mouth opened and closed several times. No words came out. The publicist tugged at her arm insistently. "This is absurd," Meghan finally said. "I came here in good faith, and you ambushed me." "I asked you questions," Piers repeated slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Questions about statements you made publicly. If that's an ambush, then every interview ever conducted is an ambush. You know what, Piers? I feel sorry for you. I really do. You're so bitter and angry that you can't stand to see other people happy or successful. You have to tear them down to make yourself feel important." Piers chuckled. I'm not the one having a meltdown on live television because someone asked me to explain myself. But please, continue with the armchair psychology. It's quite entertaining. That was apparently the final straw. Meghan ripped off her microphone, the wire snapping as she yanked it from the battery pack, clipped to her waist. She threw it on the floor. I'm done. I'm done with this charade. I'm done with you. And I'm done with this pathetic excuse for a show. She turned on her heel and marched toward the exit. Her publicist scrambled to follow, muttering apologies to the crew. The studio audience sat in stunned silence. Piers called after her. Thank you for confirming everything I suspected. This was truly enlightening. She spun around one last time. You haven't heard the last of this, Piers. I promise you that. I'm sure I haven't, he replied. I imagine you'll be on some other show tomorrow, playing the victim and blaming me for your behavior today. It's what you do best. With a sound somewhere between a scream and a growl, Meghan pushed through the studio doors and disappeared. The heavy doors swung shut behind her with a resounding thud. Piers looked at the camera, then at his audience. He took a deep breath and straightened his tie. Well, he said, a slight smile playing at his lips. That went about as well as expected. The audience erupted. Some were laughing, some were applauding, some were simply shaking their heads in disbelief. Piers returned to his seat and shuffled his notes. I genuinely invited her here to have a conversation, he continued, speaking directly to the camera. I wanted to give her a chance to explain her perspective, to help people understand where she's coming from. But as you all just witnessed, the moment anyone questions the narrative, the response is hostility and personal attacks. He paused, looking thoughtful. You know, I've interviewed some of the most controversial figures in the world. Politicians who've been caught in scandals, celebrities who've made terrible mistakes, business leaders who've destroyed lives, and almost all of them, even the worst of them, could sit in that chair and have a civil conversation. They could defend their positions. They could handle being challenged. The audience listened intently. Piers's voice was measured, serious. But what we saw today was someone who is so used to being surrounded by yes people, and so accustomed to having every word praised and every action applauded, that the mere suggestion of accountability sent her into a tailspin, and that, more than anything else, should concern people. He glanced at the empty chair across from him. I don't take pleasure in what just happened. I really don't. But I do think it was necessary. Because we live in a world where certain people believe they're above scrutiny, where fame and status somehow exempt you from having to explain yourself. And that's dangerous. The camera zoomed in on his face. When someone makes public claims, especially serious ones, they should be prepared to discuss them. That's not an attack. That's not bullying. That's called being a responsible adult. And if you can't handle that basic requirement, and then perhaps you shouldn't be making those claims in the first place. Piers picked up a pen and tapped it against his desk. I've been accused of many things over my career. Being too harsh, being too direct, not sugarcoating things. And you know what? I plead guilty to all of that. Because I believe the public deserves honesty. They deserve journalists who will ask the tough questions, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. He looked back at the audience. How many of you work hard every day? How many of you struggle to pay bills, to provide for your families, to just get by? Hands went up throughout the studio. Piers nodded. Exactly. And those are the people I'm thinking about when I conduct these interviews. Because when someone with enormous wealth and privilege complains about how tough they have it, while you're working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, that deserves to be challenged. The audience applauded. Piers held up a hand. Now, I'm sure there will be repercussions from this. I'm sure I'll be painted as the villain. I'm sure we'll hear all about how cruel and heartless I was. But you all saw what happened. You watched the same interview I did, and you can make up your own minds about who behaved appropriately and who didn't. He set down his pen and leaned forward. I want to be clear about something. I don't dislike her personally. I don't wish her ill. What I dislike is the double standard. The idea that some people get to say whatever they want without ever being questioned. The notion that criticism equals cruelty. Because it doesn't. Piers stood up again, walking to the front of his desk. We're living in strange times, folks. Times where having an opinion that differs from someone else's is treated like a hate crime. Where asking for evidence is considered an attack. Where expecting consistency and accountability makes you the bad guy. And I, for one, refuse to accept that. The studio erupted in applause again. This time Piers let it continue for a few moments before raising his hands for quiet. Look, I get it. People want to believe in heroes. They want to root for the underdog. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to be careful about who we elevate. We have to make sure the people we're championing actually deserve that support. And the only way to do that is by asking questions, by digging deeper, by not just accepting everything at face value. He walked back to his chair and sat down. What you witnessed today was someone who couldn't handle that scrutiny. And that tells you everything you need to know. Because if your story is true, if your experiences are real, if your claims are valid, then you should be able to defend them. You should welcome the opportunity to provide context and evidence. The fact that she couldn't or wouldn't speaks volumes. Piers looked directly into the camera one more time. I know some of you will disagree with me. Some of you will think I was too hard on her, and that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But I hope you'll at least consider what you saw today. I hope you'll think about the behavior that was on display. And I hope you'll ask yourself whether that's the kind of person who deserves your unwavering support. He picked up his notes and tapped them against the desk to straighten them. We have a lot more show to get through today. We've got some wonderful guests lined up who are actually willing to have a conversation. But I thought it was important to address what just happened while it was fresh, to give you my perspective, unfiltered and honest. The audience was hanging on every word. Piers smiled slightly. And to any future guests who might be watching, let this be a lesson. Come prepared. Come ready to defend your positions. Come willing to engage in actual dialogue. Because if you can't do those basic things, this might not be the show for you. He turned to one of the cameras. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll reset and continue with our scheduled programming. Thank you all for your patience and understanding. And thank you for being such a great audience. The director called for a break. The lights dimmed slightly. Piers stood and loosened his tie, shaking his head with a rueful smile. A production assistant approached him nervously. That was quite something, Piers. It certainly was, he agreed. Not exactly how I planned to spend my morning, but there you have it. Do you think she'll really cause trouble? The assistant asked. Piers shrugged. Probably. But what else is new? I've weathered worse storms than this. And besides, we have the footage. Anyone who watches it will see exactly what happened. Can't spin your way out of video evidence. Another crew member came over with a glass of water. Piers accepted it gratefully. Thanks. Needed that. The audience was buzzing with conversation. Everyone talking about what they'd just witnessed. Piers could hear snippets of their discussions. Most seemed to be on his side, though a few were debating whether he'd pushed too hard. His producer appeared, headset around her neck, tablet in hand. Well, that's going to make headlines. Everything makes headlines these days, Piers said dismissively. The question is whether we told the truth. And I think we did. The phones are already ringing off the hook, she informed him. Half want to complain, half want to congratulate you. Social media is exploding. Piers took a sip of water. Let it explode. The truth can handle the heat, the producer consulted her tablet. We should probably prepare a statement for after the show. Get ahead of the narrative. The narrative is what it is, Piers replied. We don't need to spin anything. Just release the full, unedited footage. Let people watch it and decide for themselves. She nodded, making notes. Okay, we'll do that. But be prepared for this to get ugly. It's already ugly, Piers pointed out. Might as well see it through. The stage manager called out. 2 minutes to air. Piers drained the rest of his water and handed back the glass. He straightened his tie again and ran a hand through his hair. The makeup artist rushed over for a quick touch-up. You doing okay? She asked quietly as she powdered his forehead. Never better, he said, and he meant it. And there was something clarifying about moments like this. Something that cut through all the nonsense and got to the heart of what mattered. The audience settled back into their seats as the lights came back up. The cameras repositioned. The director began the countdown. Piers looked out at the faces watching him. Regular people. People with jobs and families and real problems. People who deserved honesty from their media, not pandering and propaganda. And we're back in 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on. Piers smiled at the camera, composed and confident. Welcome back, everyone. Well, that was certainly an unexpected start to today's show. But the beauty of live television is you never quite know what's going to happen. And I think we can all agree, that was television. The audience laughed and applauded. Piers continued. Now, as promised, we have some excellent guests joining us for the rest of the hour. People who actually want to be here and engage in meaningful conversation. He glanced at his notes. First up, we have an extraordinary young man who started a charity at age 16 that has now fed over 10,000 homeless people. He's here to talk about his mission and how others can get involved. Please welcome James Richardson. A young man walked onto the set to enthusiastic applause. He shook Piers's hand warmly and sat down in the chair that had been vacated so dramatically just minutes before. James, thank you for being here, Piers said genuinely. And thank you for being willing to sit in that chair after what just happened. James grinned. I'm not worried. I'm actually here to answer questions and have a conversation. Piers laughed. What a refreshing concept. Tell us about your organization. As James began to speak about his charity work, about the homeless population he served, about the volunteers who helped him, Piers found himself relaxing. This was what the show was supposed to be about. Real people doing real things, not manufactured drama and victimhood narratives. The interview went smoothly. James was articulate and passionate. He spoke about the struggles he'd witnessed on the streets, about the elderly veterans sleeping in doorways, about the young mothers trying to shield their children from the cold. He talked about solutions, about policy changes that could help, about the basic human dignity everyone deserved. You've seen real hardship, Piers observed. Real suffering. How do you feel when you hear people with enormous resources complaining about their lives? James thought for a moment. I try not to judge. Everyone's pain is valid to them. But I do think perspective matters. When I'm serving food to someone who hasn't eaten in 3 days, who's sleeping on concrete, who doesn't know if they'll survive the winter, it does put other complaints into context. Very diplomatically put, Piers said with a smile. The rest of the show proceeded without incident. They had a chef demonstrating healthy meals on a budget. They had a comedian who had everyone laughing. They had a doctor discussing new treatments for a rare disease. Normal television, good television, the kind that informed and entertained without descending into chaos. As the show wrapped up, Piers delivered his closing remarks. Thank you all for joining us today. It's been, shall we say, an eventful morning, but I hope you also saw some of the good work being done by people like James and our other guests. Those are the stories that matter. Those are the people who deserve our attention and support. He paused, looking serious. And I hope you'll remember what you witnessed earlier. Not because I want to dwell on it, but because it's important. It's important that we hold people accountable. It's important that we ask questions. It's important that we don't just accept everything we're told at face value. The camera moved in for a close-up. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. And hopefully with guests who are prepared to actually participate. Until then, Thanks for watching. The credits rolled. The audience applauded. And Piers Morgan sat back in his chair, knowing that today's show would be talked about for a very long time.